Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar for employers. I'll just wait while some of you join the webinar. I'm Angie Crush. I'm Joint Head of the Employment Department here at Thomas Mansfield. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Julie Goodway, and our guest speaker for today, Chris Rofe. Now, today, our topic is the Great Resignation, which is a term coined by Professor Anthony Klotz, as he predicts a large number of people will leave their jobs after the COVID pandemic ends, which hopefully we're almost there, and life returns to normal. Something it definitely seems is happening by what we're seeing in the press, etc. So I'll quickly introduce the firm. Now, Thomas Mansfield was founded to specialise in employment law around 15 years ago, but we do also now have other departments. We have family law, dispute resolution and private client. But here in employment law, we work with HR teams, HR managers, and also with business owners who don't have an HR function. And we provide all types of employment law support. Now, today we'll be exploring how the changing world of work is impacting the recruitment and retention of workers. And we'll examine the steps that employers can start to take to prepare for this. Also, how best to navigate the legal challenges you face when attracting new talent. We'll focus on the do's and don'ts of the recruitment process, so including how to attract the best talent and avoiding discriminatory and other undesirable recruitment practices. And we'll also examine the legal status of pre-contract discussions and the contract of employment itself. And last but no means least, we have Chris Rofe, who's a partner at employee benefits experts Lockton, who they will look how leading employers are within a wide range of sectors are addressing this challenge by strengthening their employee experience and reward strategies. Now, we like our webinars to be interactive. So if you have questions, please do ask them. And you can do this by writing in the chat box at the side of the screen. And can I just check in the chat box that it's working? If someone could just pop a message in there to say like yes, that would be great. Please ask your questions. We'll get them answered either as we go through or at the end if we don't have time as we're going through. Now, a recent survey of 1,000 workers in the UK reveals that almost a third of UK workers are considering moving to a new job this year. Findings also uncovered that the industry is most likely to be affected by this mass migration of staff. Start with legal, 44%, IT and telecoms at 42%, and sales, media and marketing, 40%. Now, we want to know what your business's experience has been over the past 12 months. And I'm going to do this by starting off with a poll, just to see, has your business seen greater staff turnover in the last 12 months compared to previous years? So hopefully you can see that poll there now. And just let us know if you feel your sort of staff turnover is higher than average, looking back at this past year, sort of coming out of the pandemic. So looking at it, so 88% are saying yes, which well, it's gone to 90% saying yes. So those figures definitely seem to bear out what we're seeing in the press about, you know, the Great Resignation. And hopefully that means our webinar's on topic today. We'd also be interested, it's ended up 77 and 22%. So I'll end that poll now. But we'd also be interested, and perhaps you could do this by putting comments in the chat box. What are the reasons being given by the people you're seeing resigning? Is it pay? Is it flexible working, career progression? What's the sort of feedback? What's the feel out there for why people are leaving? Because I think it'd be interesting for everyone to know if they're getting the same message from employees. Now, our first topic of the day is what to do and not to do during the recruitment process itself, how to avoid illegal practices. And it's worth saying that we don't see that many claims in this area. Probably I've seen a couple in the 20 years that I've been practicing from applicants trying to take claims. But also at the heart of recruitment now is, the question of how employers are ensuring that their candidates and their employees come from a diverse pool, to try and make sure that the workforces reflect true diversity, and whether that's, race, sex, age, social class, all of those things need to be looked at by employers. And again, we'd really welcome you sharing in the chat box any sort of strategies that you found work well to ensure that you are getting that right mix. Looking at the comments that you're making, and thanks for engaging with this, pay seems to be a sort of a big one. A couple of career progressions, relocations, but certainly, pay and what employers are able to offer is key, it would seem, and hopefully that's really topical when Chris talks to us a bit later. Now, Julie, it's common sense why employers want to avoid unlawful recruitment practices, but what are some of the other issues with poor recruitment practices?
Well, I expect our viewers already know that bad hires are expensive. By the time you take into account the costs of recruitment, the time that's spent on training and induction, you've got notice pay, you've got their salary, and also the effect generally that bad hire will have on their other colleagues. The costs to the business do really start to mount up.
And I know we've talked in depth in previous webinars about issues such as discrimination, but just remind our viewers of some of the legal issues that could be encountered in the context of recruitment.
Well, discrimination is a big issue. And this is really because there is no qualifying service that someone needs in order to bring a claim of discrimination or harassment. In fact, individuals don't even need to be employees or workers to bring such a claim. And so it's worth remembering for employers, look, do not discriminate in terms of the arrangements that you make for deciding who to recruit by not recruiting someone, and also in terms of the terms that you're offering the employment on.
And who could be responsible for any discrimination claims made by an applicant?
Well, a job applicant can bring a claim against the person, against really anyone who's responsible for making decisions about recruitment. The individual that is the hiring person can be held liable, but also the employer can be held vicariously liable for the discriminatory actions of that person. Now, it's likely here that the employer should hopefully have a defence to say that they took all reasonable steps to prevent that discrimination or harassment, but of course only if they have taken all reasonable steps. Another point, and this is maybe one that maybe a lot of employers may not be aware of, is that they can be held vicariously liable for the actions of recruitment agencies or consultants where those agencies are conducting the recruitment on that employer's behalf. And that's even if the recruitment agency is acting against the, the approval of or the knowledge of the employer. But we will be looking, I believe, later at the steps that employers can take to avoid such liability.
And turning to the actual recruitment process, what are the practical steps from a legal perspective employers should take looking to recruit new workers?
Well, when drawing up a job description, a person specification and advertising for the role, obviously we want to avoid potential claims of discrimination. So the first thing is, I would say, is look at the job title. And certainly do avoid any job titles that are going to show a bias towards a particular characteristic. Don't use terms, it's probably might be a bit more difficult, probably not so likely for some of our viewers here, but don't use terms like handyman, waitress, office boy. I'm always surprised by how many shop windows I see job adverts in that do refer to such terms. So avoid anything like that. Also, consider what skills and knowledge you need. Avoid specifying qualifications that may have not been previously available. So, for example, if you're needing somebody to have a minimum of 5 GCSEs, don't just state that. Go on to say, or equivalent experience. Because as we know, GCSEs only came about in 1988, so we don't want to be putting off any older candidates. Another point is, don't stipulate the highest level of experience that you're looking for, unless you can justify this and not just on financial grounds. And there's a good case that highlights that, and that's the case of Rainbow against Milton Keynes Council. Now here, Ms. Rainbow was a very experienced school teacher, and she was 61 years of age. The council advertised for a school teacher post, and they said that they were looking for someone with up to 5 years of post-qualification experience. Now, Ms. Rainbow obviously had more than 5 years of experience, and so when she applies, she's not shortlisted. And she brings a tribunal claim, and the tribunal did say that yes, the 5-year post-qualification requirement as their upper limit was indirectly discriminatory against older candidates. A slightly different take on that is the case of Raymond Levy against McHale Legal. Now, Mr. Levy was an experienced commercial property solicitor, and McLegal initially said that they were looking for someone with more than 5 years of post-qualification experience. Mr. Levy had that. In fact, he's the only candidate, and he's interviewed. And he's really given the impression during the interview that the job is his. In fact, they tell him, we're looking for someone, i.e. you, to start immediately. Now, Mr. Levy was 57 years of age, and he was therefore a bit surprised afterwards that he didn't get an offer straight away. And when he inquires, he's then told that the board have considered his application, and they've now mysteriously decided that they want someone with between 3 and 5 years of post-qualification experience. And he brings a claim about that, and the tribunal says that yes, that was direct age discrimination against Mr. Levy. So I'd say that this is a lesson to learn to say, if you're going to set criteria, then ideally don't start changing those halfway through, because it may then give rise to somebody alleging that it's discriminatory. Another point just to note here is about the outcomes. In terms of when you're advertising for a role, focus on the outcomes that you're wanting someone to achieve. There may be different ways of somebody being able to do the job and still get the same outcome. And this is really about making sure that you're not discriminating against somebody who's disabled. They may be able to still achieve the same outcome that you want, but do it in a slightly different way. Another point, and finally, is really to consider, do you really need to have somebody that is working full-time? Can you do part-time? Can you do flexible working, job share arrangements, working at home? Because not only would this avoid potential discrimination, but it's also going to open up your potential pool of candidates. I expect most people out there now are looking for some form of flexibility, not just for childcare reasons, but also to get more of a work-life balance. And by being clear from the start about what type of arrangements you can offer will help you then to answer any interview questions satisfactorily.
Thanks, Julie. And it's probably worth adding that there are some exceptions to the prohibition on discrimination, and these are known as occupational requirements, which we don't have time to get into those today, but it can be a tricky area. So it's best to take advice if you're considering making it an occupational requirement to have or not have a particular protected characteristic. So just to say, I can see we've got a question in, but that ties in well with something, Judy, I'm going to ask about later. Let's say we've drawn up our job and person specs. We've advertised the vacancy and we're now shortlisting and interviewing candidates. What things should employers be considering at this stage?
Well, the key point is to ensure that your selection process is fair and consistent. And it's also particularly important to take into account the needs of disabled employees during the recruitment and selection process, and to be flexible. Now, there is an employment tribunal case that highlights that, which is the case involving Miss Brooks and the Government Legal Service. Now, here, the Government Legal Service had a requirement that for candidates applying for their legal training contract, that those candidates needed to first pass a multiple choice psychometric test. Now, Ms. Brooks had Asperger's syndrome, and she said that doing that test in that way was going to be difficult for her, and could she instead submit her answers in a short narrative form. The Government Legal Service refused it, and they did though say you can have a bit of extra time. Now, lo and behold, Brooks does do the test, and she doesn't meet the pass mark, so she doesn't go through to the next stage, and she brings a tribunal claim. And here both the tribunal and the Employment Appeal Tribunal ruled in favour of Ms. Brooks, and they held that she had been discriminated against. They say that the requirement to complete the psychometric test placed Ms. Brooks at a particular disadvantage because of her condition. And they said that there'd been a failure to make a reasonable adjustment, there'd been indirect disability discrimination, and also discrimination arising from a disability. The tribunal did acknowledge that Ms. Brooks's request would have been more work for the Government Legal Service, but that what she was asking, the extra work that would have been involved for them, was not proportionate to the impact that it had on Ms. Brooks. I'd also say that as a general rule, do ensure that as far as possible, arrangements for holding tests, interviews, assessment centres, don't put any candidates again at a potential disadvantage. Do try to ensure that they're held. Maybe look at, are there any religious festivals, etc., going on, and try to avoid those. But also, it's always a good idea, isn't it, to ask candidates, are there any reasonable adjustments that can be made to assist them during the interview process? And then where possible, do make those. But of course, it's only going to be as far as reasonably possible. And Angie, this reminds me of a matter that we discussed once before, one that was involving one of your clients, where the candidate was making some very, very odd requests.
Yes, this was a perfect illustration of adjustments only needing to be reasonable. It involved an applicant who I think lived in Scotland, applying for a job based in London, and claimed to have several disabilities, but insisted they wanted a face-to-face interview in London, even though Skype alternative was offered. And from recollection, he had a list of adjustments that he wanted making, which included, and I'm not joking with this list, but it was things like a first-class flight or business class flight from Scotland to London for him and a companion, because he needed a companion because of his disabilities, a chauffeur-driven car to meet him at the airport, take him 2 nights of hotel accommodation in London because he would need to settle for a day before he could attend the interview, a fairly generous meal allowance whilst in London. I mean, the list was completely out of proportion as to what was reasonable for them to provide for this, fairly, standard type of job. And it ended up being a difficult case because this person wouldn't sort of be flexible at all about the demands that were being made. They ended up not wanting to interview at all because they just felt that they were a difficult character, which obviously posed its own problems. And yeah, that was a tricky one to sort out, but thankfully it all turned out okay in the end. And it's a good illustration. The key is, yes, be accommodating, but the adjustments do only need to be reasonable, and just keep that in mind. And so based on what you've been talking about, what key tips would you give?
Yes, I'll just check my microphone here. So first of all, have a written recruitment policy that sets out a commitment towards equal opportunities, fair recruitment and diversity. But don't just stop there. Also, make sure that those who are involved in recruitment are properly trained on it, and then give refresher training as well. Because not only is such training good practice, but that is where it can be that defence for an employer to say that they took all reasonable steps to prevent discrimination. And that also ties in with what we were talking about before, which is about the recruitment agencies. When you're engaging with recruitment agencies, do have in place, something documented to say that they are agreeing to abide by equal opportunities. Ask them to confirm that they've done training, etc. And again, keep a record of that. Another thing is, it can always be helpful to have some set questions that you're going to be asking the candidates, and also have a template form on which the interviewer is going to record the responses. We certainly do want to avoid interviewers straying into potentially discriminatory topics, and certainly real no-nos are anything to do really with childcare, marital status, nationality, disability, age, that type of thing. Basically, avoid questions that are not relevant to the requirements of the job. And as I touched upon before, it's always a good idea to keep good records. Interviewers who fail to do so are going to find it difficult later, if they're challenged on their decisions, to explain why they made certain decisions. But also remember that those documents may well be disclosable in any tribunal proceedings, and therefore be careful about what you are putting in there. The case that I mentioned earlier of Raymond Levy against McHowell Legal, probably a prime example of this, because here, when the decision was being made, they made some rather odd and strange comments on the form, and obviously that was picked up in terms of the tribunal claim, and that did not go down well for them. So only ensure that appropriate comments are being put in writing.
Thanks, Julie. And it might be worth saying here, something that employers can consider is whether the end of a recruitment process for a particular role might be a good time to benchmark existing pay and benefits, etc. Because sometimes once you've concluded that interview process and checked with all your candidates what their salary expectations are, you may realise that your current pay is a bit out of date. Julie and I, we recently discussed a fairly progressive practice of some companies who, at the conclusion of a recruitment process, actively look across the board at their salaries. And if they feel, they're a little bit out now, and they will actively go and increase their existing employees' salaries. So they will go to them proactively and say, look, we've realised that we're a bit out of line with current salary expectations. We don't want you to feel, that you're getting less than new recruits. And so we're going to bring it up to the market standard. And I think that it does two things. One is it makes them less likely to look elsewhere and leave to get that higher salary. But I think it's a really positive thing for employers to be so transparent and proactive about it. And it says a lot about the employer's culture if they're valuing their existing employees enough to be taking that sort of approach. I'm just going to pause there because we have had a couple of questions come in. So firstly, and I guess this is perhaps a little bit more about what we were talking in the last webinar about hybrid working. So one of the questions is, what happens if you have a formal hybrid working model? Could it be indirectly discriminatory to women who are more likely to want flexible arrangements? I guess my view on that is if you've got a formal hybrid model, that is likely to mean you are requiring some days in the office or workplace, as well as sometimes being able to work remotely. And I would have thought that that sort of model, actually satisfied that need for flexibility. The fact that you require them to come into the office at all, or workplace, as the case may be, is always going to be justified. I think it'd be very difficult for any business to say that there was absolutely no need for anyone to be in person in the office, or there were no benefits to it. So I think employers will always be able to justify a need for people to be in a certain portion of the time. And actually, I think it sort of raises another question, which is, as the sort of pandemic has played out, we're certainly seeing more men as well as women who have been taking more of an active role in drop-offs and all of those sorts of things, actually saying, well, no, we want to stay flexible working as well. Whereas historically, they haven't tended to make as many formal applications. But I think it will be interesting as time moves on to see, is it now the case that it's, clear that women take the higher burden, now that there has been this more of a sharing over the course of the pandemic. So I think my answer to that is, I don't think having a hybrid model is likely to be indirectly discriminatory, because there'll be justification there. Obviously, it's always a case-by-case basis. Julie, we're going to look now at offers and contracts, and then on to another question that we've had come in. So talk to us a bit about some of the issues around offers and pre-contract discussions.
Well, once you've identified that successful candidate, you're going to want to follow it up by putting forward an offer of employment. You may do that verbally, but in any event, you're going to want to follow it up and set it out in writing. Now, I advise that you state that the offer is going to be subject to getting satisfactory references, and also give a deadline by which the candidate needs to come back to you to accept the offer. A key thing, though, is that we are going to want to avoid any misunderstandings. It's probably quite common before the offer is finalised, during that process, that there's going to be some negotiations around it. But certainly once the offer, you've got it finalised, then the offer letter should state that that supersedes any previous discussions. And also, I would suggest putting in that the offer is conditional on the employee signing a full employment contract, which may include additional terms. And then when you offer the employment contract itself, note within this that this contains, or that this is, the entire agreement between the parties. And this is probably a bit of a belt and braces approach, but one which should then avoid the employee being able to argue that the terms that they've accepted have then been unilaterally varied later by the employer.
Okay. And just to go to the question now, there's a question on whether you should put a bonus in a contract. I guess it depends is the answer. I mean, when I'm drafting for employers, I will generally try to draft the absolute minimum obligations possible. But at the same time, especially when it's an employee's market, as it is at the moment, there's an element of, we need to make sure people want to sign up to our contracts. Very often, I will put an entitlement to participate in a bonus scheme in the contract with the actual details of that bonus scheme to be communicated on an annual basis, because the parameters may change on an annual basis. You may require higher company performance, individual performance. It may change year to year, and that gives some flexibility to do that. Ideally, you'll always retain ultimate discretion and put that in the contract that, that there may be a scheme, but ultimately is discretionary, and it will all come down to whether the company decide to exercise their discretion in a particular year to give bonuses. But I think at the moment, certainly with the way the market is, employees will probably, if there's an expectation of a bonus, they will want to see some mention of it in the contract. But if I was drafting that, I would try to draft it in a way that, yes, you'll participate, but this may change on an annual basis or whatever. There will be some industries where, especially those sales commission-based industries, where you will need to lay it out as a contractual bonus in the contract, because that will form a large part of their entire package. And in those, I don't think anyone's going to be joining unless they know that that's going to be a definite entitlement of theirs. So thanks for that, Judy. One other question that we've had coming in is whether, maybe I'll ask you to answer this after I've spoken to Chris a bit, but whether you can ask about someone's right to work status in an interview. But while we're still on the topic of offers, what if you have to withdraw the offer after they've accepted, but before they've started? What happens then? Do you want to answer that, Julie?
Yes. In terms of this, I think you need to be aware that there could be a potential liability to pay, maybe notice pay. But equally, I suppose it depends really on how much in advance that you're withdrawing that offer. And again, maybe if you're thinking that might happen, it may be that you could write the contract to say along the lines that, that the notice pay or something like that would only apply from when the actual when the employment is due to start. But generally, you could become liable for notice pay.
Yeah, on the basis that if they'd started and within 2 weeks you'd worked out, they weren't the right person, you could have simply given them the notice pay. And I guess that's one reason why it's a good idea to have a very short notice period, certainly in the sort of first 6 months of employment or whatever, again, if you can get away with it in the current market. I'll do the follow-up question to the bonus. What about having the bonus wording in the offer letter and something vague in the contract? It sort of goes back to what Julie was saying as to trying to make the contract, the overriding document, which in this case would mean you ended up with something vague about the bonus. And obviously that's ideal from an employer's point of view, because you're not then committing yourself to any course of action. I think the practical problem is more whether it causes the employee to say, do you know what, I won't actually join you because you're not committing to anything, and I can't really even, see what I'm going to be potentially getting under a bonus scheme. So it's certainly the ideal, but I wonder if at the moment it won't necessarily work to attract candidates to join you as opposed to somewhere else. So thanks for that run through, Julie. So I'm going to move on to our guest speaker, Chris, now. about what employers can be considering in terms of attracting and retaining talent. Please ask any questions to him about this. So I'm going to ask Chris to introduce himself, and I think he's going to start off by just running some polls to understand a bit about your benefits, provisions, etc. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks for inviting me along, and nice to meet everyone on the call today. Good to see so many questions and comments coming in. So just so I get a sense for where we are as a group, Angie, I wonder if you could just run those polls for me. So I've just got 3 quick questions just to help me gauge things here.
So yeah, the first one's up. Have you seen, oh, hang on, no, that's the wrong poll. So you can't get the star for these things. Right, here we go. Excluding pension, do you offer any additional non-salary employee benefits to your people? So, how many people here today offer benefits other than just salary and pension? Well, there's a whopping 100% at the moment that are offering that. And that's probably what we'd expect to see, I'm guessing, Chris.
Absolutely. It may drop off a little there, but the vast majority, which is good to know. Yeah.
And so the second question is, how many of your employees do you think understand their benefits and how to fully use them? And so we've got percentages less than 25, 25 to 50, 51 to 75, and 75 plus. So there's very few that think that more than 75% of people know how to use their benefits fully and actually understand what they are. And that certainly ties in with my experience. If I've ever seen employees, half the time they don't really know what benefits they've got or what they mean. So that's interesting. 40% think only 25 to 50% know what benefits they've got. 51 to 75% of people, only 47% thought that percentage know about their benefits. And like I say, it's ended up with just 9% thinking that more than 75% of their employee workforce fully know about their benefits. And then the final question on this area is, how many of your employees do you think actually know and understand how much their benefits provision costs their employer? Do you think they really understand what the cost to you as an employer is of all these benefits you're providing them with? And it's interesting that currently 70% of you think, or 75% is going up, think that less than 25% of your workforce understand the cost of providing all these benefits. 16% think perhaps 25 to 50% know, and no one, not 1% of people think that more than half of their workforce understand the cost of benefits provision to their employer. So I'm sure you've got something to say about that, Chris. What do you think about those polls? What's your observations on those?
So I appreciate everyone for taking part in those polls. And I guess that's the reason why you've invited me along. So I think we're seeing a situation where benefits are more important than they've ever been. The comments on the chat room were immediately around salary. We know we're living in a cost of living crisis. And of course, salary is important. But I'm sure everyone on the call today and all the employers, there's only a certain tolerance for salary, and keep throwing salary at the issues not going to fix it. So, if you think we ran a Lockton Global Benefits survey back in late 2020, so the first proper year of COVID, and the clients that participated in that survey, 55% said they were looking at pay cuts and freezes. 53% had hiring freezes, 31% were running redundancies. We had a recruitment market that was completely in reverse. No more than 2 years later, we've now got a recruitment market that's in fast forward. And what we're seeing is that engaging, inclusive and well communicated benefits are more important than they've ever been in terms of recruitment and attraction of talent.
And as you say, employers can't just keep throwing money at the salary. So what do you see employers trying to do now to make themselves more attractive for candidates, and where can employers start to make a change?
So, that reverse of where we were with COVID. So we've now moved into a phase where we've got historically low unemployment levels, a genuine shortage of talent, and we've got those increased salary demands. It's almost as if employers have gone from sellers of jobs to buyers of talent. And that throws a big spotlight on benefits for candidates and employees to get a sense for the sort of business you are and what do your benefits say about you as a company. So that's what's put the spotlight on them. I think in terms of where organisations can make a start, and many people on this call would have already made a start, and they're at different points in the journey. But I think our advice would be, first and foremost, take your time and be strategic. So don't panic. Just because you've seen one of your big competitors or someone in your peer group offer a benefit, don't immediately think you've got to offer that benefit as well. So take some time to understand where you are, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. So strategy is important. I think also understanding what you want your market position to be. Do you want to be, have you done your benchmarking? Do you want to be mid-tier? Do you want to be upper quartile? So just understand that market position and differentiation. Ask what your employees want. And like your example there with the organisation that uses the recruitment to look at salaries, use your recruitment to look at the benefits people want, because clearly you want to offer benefits that are of value to your existing employees and those that you're wishing to recruit. And then build out that plan and execute. So it really is to take time to think it through and then decide how you're going to build it out.
Thanks. And it's not just benefits that employers need to be looking at, is it? How important do you feel company culture is?
So I think culture is vital. As the saying goes, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. I think we've got demanding employee bases at the moment. The benefits need to be aligned to your business, to your HR policy, to your practices, formal and informal, and to your culture. Because if the benefits that you're offering aren't aligned, so for example, as a lot of people are doing at the moment, offering additional holiday or take your birthday off, if when one of your employees wants to make use of that benefit, there's a frown from the line manager or a little joke about taking another day off, they will call you out. So you do have to have this alignment with your culture, with your policies, because your employees are expecting integrity. So I think when you're looking at what you want to offer, if you don't really mean it, don't do it. Make sure it does have that alignment to your culture.
And I'm sure that all employers would like to be able to offer as many benefits as possible to their employees. But obviously cost is always going to be a factor. And so for those watching, is it always expensive to achieve a good benefits range?
Of course it can be. Things like private medical insurance, things like health screening and other services, they can be expensive in their own right. But they don't have to cost a fortune. In our experience, the most expensive benefit an organisation can offer is the benefit that the employees don't value, because that is a complete waste of money. So I think it comes back to understanding what your employees want. Again, we've done a number of focus groups with clients, and we've managed to find that a lot of the things employees wanted were relatively simple, relatively inexpensive, often free. I remember one focus group where actually they wanted to be able to trade holiday. So people that had holiday that they weren't going to use, but someone in their team had done a great job, they wanted to be able to gift their holiday. To the employer, that was absolutely free because holiday is holiday, other than, you know, some changes into the salary and into the payroll. But that meant a lot to the employee base. So I think it comes back to understanding what your employees want to make sure it's not expensive. Map out what you already have. It always surprises us, organisations that don't think they're doing very well and don't think they offer much. Once it's all mapped out, you realise there's already a lot of tools in the toolbox. Going back to our surveys, the challenge is communicating them well and making sure your people know how to use them. Leverage value-added services. So many people on this call may offer private medical insurance, group life, group income protection. Many of those products will have other goodies, other freebies under the bonnet that organisations can really make use of and leverage. And then I guess my final point on the expense is the employer doesn't have to take all of the burden. The employer can understand what core benefits they wish to offer and then avail their employees of choice. Would they like to buy something through salary sacrifice? Would they like to top up a benefit through paying additional themselves? So it doesn't all sit with the employer.
Thanks. That's really good advice. And actually, yeah, I think for employees to be able to top up themselves is great. And, you know, I do it with ours, and it's not actually that expensive to do, but it's really good to be able to do it at some sort of a discount. What are the common pitfalls you see employers making with their employee benefit provision?
So there are a few, but I think probably the three themes that we generally see in pitfalls. So the market is really dynamic at the moment. There's many new to market providers. There's many existing providers improving their products. There's a lot of stuff out there. You know, as consultants, we have to help our clients see the wood for the trees. So I think one of the first pitfalls is clients being lured into something that's a bit of a shiny thing, a bit of a new fad. It comes back to strategy. It's not linked to strategy. Maybe it's an unproven vendor where no one's done appropriate due diligence. It lacks cohesion. It jars with other benefits. So it's a little bit short term and myopic, but it's easily done. So pitfall number one is being drawn to something that looks shiny, but it doesn't align itself with other things. I think the other thing for me is being aware of unintended consequences. So there are a lot of organisations doing a lot of good things with the best intentions, but often with unintended outcomes. So for example, probably 3 or 4 years back, a big American bank went public to say that it was going to start including infertility treatment in its medical program. And I'm sure we'd all agree that's a good thing to do. The unintended consequence was their employees saying, but you don't pay for routine maternity, routine pregnancy. Similarly, and absolutely it's the right thing to do, there's a huge focus on women's health and the menopause. But is there as much focus on men with low testosterone and other things? So I think those unintended consequences, taking time to look at the whole picture, are important. And then the final pitfall is working in silos. So in many organisations, the HR or compensation and benefit fraternity owns some of the benefits, but actually there's connection with the health and safety office or the risk manager. There's connection with an occupational health program. So to really get the best return from some of these benefits is trying to break those silos and get all your stakeholders aligned.
Thanks, Chris. What are the favourite new products that you're seeing out there? Because, you know, many benefits have been around for years, private medical, you know, things like that. But what are, you know, there are definitely new products. So what are the ones that your sort of employer clients seem to be choosing to take up? And I guess that is probably because they are the ones that seem to be valued by their employees most.
Yeah, and again, this is where I need to make sure that I'm not lured into shiny things as well and look at what's out there. So I think if we try and break the market down into some headings, you mentioned things like medical insurance, group life, group income protection. One of the things we're seeing is employers looking to repurpose and recycle what used to be traditional benefits. You know, COVID has taught us that unfortunately people do get sick. The NHS is going to have a lack of investment for a number of years. So a lot of organisations are doubling down on some of their existing benefits to make sure they're fit for purpose and make sure they're well communicated. I think in terms of newer benefits, clearly you've got that cluster of health and well-being related benefits. So clearly things like mental health, so providers out there such as Calm, Headspace, Champion Health, there are others. I touched on women's health and the menopause. That's a huge area of focus. You know, ourselves at Lockton, we've put lots of new product services and signposting in for menopause. Tesco's have just released a booklet to all staff. So I think that's an area of focus. You've got the medical insurance providers adding more cover, and you've got organisations such as Peppy coming into the market. Fertility we've touched on, so Apricity, Carrot and others coming to the market. And also some of the areas around cancer support. So we do have some cancer issues coming through. We've had lots of misdiagnoses over the last couple of years, and organisations such as Reframe and Percy that are looking to support and case manage cancer. So I think those health and wellbeing markets are interesting. And then finally, probably for this call, just to touch on the ESG, so environmental, social and governance. A lot of people looking at carbon offsetting, a lot of people looking at charitable giving. The two key areas that we're seeing are pension investments. So organisations taking time to make sure that their organisational pensions are invested in the right funds, sustainable, responsible, low impact, ethical. So there's a lot of work going on in that space. And then one of the interesting ones that we're seeing is electronic cars and hybrid car schemes. So there are some significant government incentives for us to be greener. There are various salary sacrifice savings. So a lot of organisations now are looking to offer employees the chance to purchase on a lease an electronic vehicle or a hybrid vehicle via salary sacrifice. And some of those arrangements really are of great value to the employee. And of course, they help the organisation support their ESG credentials.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, I've just done some sort of car policies, something employers never offered before, but they had a few inquiries about whether they could get a car via work under these schemes. And so I've just done some work with an employer on this. So yeah, definitely, and that's a relatively small employer, so there's definitely take up out there on those sorts of schemes. Also, what are your top tips for success before we let you go?
Okay, so I think this is a summary of probably what we've been discussing here over the last few minutes. So I think for me, the number one is alignment to culture. If it jars, if you can't be true to yourself, if you can't look in the mirror and say, we want to offer benefits for gender dysphoria, we want to offer benefits for neurodiversity, we want to allow people to go to the gym whenever they like. If you don't really mean it, don't do it. I think it needs to be linked to business objectives, and that's entirely legitimate. What are you doing as a business? What levels of productivity and engagement do you want? Because we all know that happy, healthy and engaged individuals are more productive. So there's no harm in aligning it to business objectives. Stick to your strategy, stick to your route map. Phase things, don't try and boil the ocean. Better to do one or two things and do them very well than to try and do too much and overreach yourself. And back to what I've said about those value-added services, really squeeze the pips from your vendors. Make sure you've maximised everything your vendors have got to offer before you have to go out and find new budget to buy new things.
Thanks, Chris. And one final thing, it's slightly outside of core benefits, but we know there is a UK trial going on at the moment where certain employers have been appointed to trial a 4-day week, moving towards an output-based model. Now, Lockton's an international business. Have you seen this happening elsewhere? Have you got any observations on this? And actually, it might be interesting if our viewers put in the chat whether any of you, I'm guessing because I think there's a fairly small number of employers at the moment involved in the trial, but is it something that any of you would consider trialing, do you think, to really sort of retain and attract staff? But what are your observations on this, Chris?
I'd be interested to see what comes of the chat. And I think one of the questions around agile working talks to this. I think this is going to be one of the really big challenges for employers. We've seen that Goldman Sachs, even an organisation like Goldman Sachs, many would say, are now offering additional holiday. You're right, we're international. We've got a huge footprint in the US. Down on the West Coast, they've been looking at unlimited leave or PTO, paid time off, for a number of years. And they've got challenges of different state legislation out there. So I think these metrics for monitoring performance, I think getting the agile working position right, organisation, so you don't have people at home fearing that they're missing out on whether they should be in the office. And, coming back to what you do there at Thomas Mansfield, there are some contractual obligations, there are some output obligations. IT security. Do you want one of your people working with a laptop in a Starbucks all day? So I think this is a real challenging period we're going into, but we are definitely in a phase now where an employee or a prospective employee's views on what their working practices are going to be are very, very different to the traditional 9 to 5.
Thanks. Thanks for your input on that. One area I would just say that I see employers definitely could do more to retain or attract is their family leave offering, because many employers now offer enhanced maternity pay, but many still don't offer the same enhancements for men wanting to take shared parental leave. And definitely anecdotally, a lot of women either stay with their employer because they have good maternity benefits if they're at a period of their life where they feel they're likely to take some family leave, or will be attracted to a new employer that has good family leave benefits. And presumably, the same would apply to men if they had good benefits for sort of shared parental leave that they were able to take. And certainly we're seeing more and more men using shared parental leave now. So I do think that's an area where employers can be considering the attraction and retention of people by just evening those up a bit. Good to see people commenting that they are sort of looking at flexible working, having very flexible hours, 9-day fortnight. But interestingly, not that many people taking it up because they need to work longer days to accrue the flexi time. Interesting that there's not so much take up there. I'm just going to briefly ask Julie. Thank you, first of all, Chris. That was really interesting talk and gives a lot of food for thought. I'm going to ask Julie briefly to answer the right to work question. So can you ask someone's right to work status in an interview?
Well, I would say it's okay to ask that question, but perhaps then if you get an answer which says not yet, then maybe just to follow it up by saying, would you have that by the time that the job is to start? Because obviously it's fine to actually have a job as being conditional on them having the right to work. You cannot recruit someone without them having the right to work in the UK. But I suppose just be careful that if someone says no, that you then just follow it up by saying, would you have it by the time that the job is to start?
Okay, thanks for that. And thanks to both of you for sharing your insights with us today. And thanks for everyone for joining. We hope this has been a useful webinar. If you have any queries on anything we've talked about today, you can either get in touch with us at Thomas Mansfield. All of our details can be found at our website, www.thomasmansfield.com. And Chris's details can similarly be found on the Lockton website, which is www.lockton.com. We're taking a break next month, but in July we have a really good webinar focused on employment claims and compensation. And we're going to be having a real focus on how compensation works in employment claims, because very often, the compensation side of things isn't as bad as employers might imagine. Average awards are actually very low in many types of claim. So that should be a real sort of learning-based webinar. Please go to our website to register your interest, and we hope to see you soon. But for now, we will say goodbye and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.